the most consumed product in the United States are probably the synthetic opioids, simply given the huge number of people who believe they're taking counterfeit oxy. Like no one, they're not going to the local dealer saying, let me get some Fenny. They're purchasing, the 30 milligram Perkies or the 60 milligram. They're essentially made to look just like some legitimate pharmaceuticals. And so the customers are essentially getting deceived.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland, Narcosis, and Ironclad Original, presented by First Form Supplements. You know where to get them, firstform.com/Borderland. And my next guest is someone that you guys all loved. It's Pierre Rausini. He's coming back to talk about money laundering and as well as the Venezuelan government and how that looks with the United States right now. So awesome conversation. You guys will love it. Go check it out. Welcome back, Pierre, to the show. Thank you so much for returning. Obviously, all your clips get so many hits. People go crazy when you talk. I'm excited to see what's next. One of the first things I want to jump on, because I know we have a lot to talk about, is Venezuela. There's a lot going on here right now with the United States. You've seen from the bombings of the boats to all kinds of different stuff. And so very excited to hear what you have, I guess, information on and exactly what you take from the situations. Let's just start with that right away, like the relationship between Venezuela and the United States and what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. And yes, my name is Pierre Rausini. And as your audience does know, I've been recently released from federal prison, and I do have a significant background in drug trafficking, essentially. And with respect to Venezuela, the situation has been operational down there on a significant level for the better part of the past 15 years. That's when you really started hearing grumblings within the higher level trafficking community about things having moved over into Venezuela, because the Venezuelan government has essentially adopted the plaza system that is utilized in Mexico, and they supercharged it. And they provide a full spectrum of services. Now, the baseline service are simply they facilitate a marketplace. And so the analogy I use with respect to this particular issue is that of a casino and poker. Because normally when you go to Vegas, you're gambling, you're betting against the house. Or on poker, you're gambling against the other players. So how does the casino make money? Well, the casino makes the money two ways. One, they host the tournament or host the tables. That's what the Venezuelan government does. They host the market. And in addition to hosting the market, the casino, they take a rake, a percentage of all of the table stakes played on every game. So let's say it's a $500 table, it's a 5% rake. They're making $25 per hand. So every hand played, they get 25 bucks. So same thing in Venezuela. You're going to have Mexican trafficking groups coordinating with Colombian trafficking groups on Venezuelan soil. Because in Venezuela, they're going to provide a safe haven for the activity. 30 years ago, you'd have Europeans coming to the United States. Most of it would take place in Los Angeles. Well, it's very risky in the US. FBI, DEA, the full panoply of Homeland Security agencies. Well, they're very effective. So then that transitioned from there to Mexico. Well, Mexico's much more freedom of movement than compared to the United States, but it's still very risky, particularly because the DEA has an extensive intelligence gathering capacity in Mexico. So for Europeans to come to Mexico, you've got to, you can get jammed up because the DEA catches wind of a German trafficker in there buying 600 keys. They feed that information back to Germany. The federal authorities in Germany will take them down. These are first world Western European nations. Law enforcement is competent. And so, although Mexico is better than the United States, Venezuela has essentially become a trafficker's paradise. Because there you have complete movement, because the government is not going to interfere in the operations, because one, they're charging them for the services of hosting the market, and two, they take their rake for each transaction. Now, on top of that, well, the interesting part about the rake is when the Venezuelans get paid. So for instance, let's say there's, we're going to charge you $3 million. Well, they don't want $3 million in cash. They want the equivalent of $3 million in product. So for instance, cocaine. Well, at the Colombian price, make it easy, 2,500 a key, you're talking 600 kilos. So now, how do the Venezuelans cash out? Well, they'll stake the 600 keys with the Mexicans and say, hey, how much can you get selling this to the gringos in Los Angeles? And they'll say, we'll get you 15,000 per key. So that's a $9 million payout. So they'll take the equivalent of $3 million in product, stake it with the Mexicans. Now, the Mexicans don't sell those particular 600 keys to Los Angeles. They already have keys in LA. So they'll just send those 600 keys to Europe and use the 600 keys in LA. So the number one in the Guadalajara distribution office will call the number one in the LA distribution office and say, hey, 600 kilos, set that aside, the proceeds, let's go into Venezuela. And so the Venezuelan government has found a way to not only capitalize from hosting the markets, but they've also found a way how they're going to be able to receive exponential returns. Now, once you move beyond the hosting, this is where they've gone beyond Mexico to where now they're providing a full panoply of services. So if you want transportation across the country, well, they can guarantee your loads aren't going to get knocked off. You pay a fee. If you want to use the country as a launch pad for aviation-based operations, shooting them into Mexico, shooting them into Europe, well, they can guarantee that the product is going to get onto the 747 bound for Paris without being searched. And so you got aviation-based operations going from Venezuela to Europe, Venezuelan operations going, or either Mexican operations utilizing Venezuela as a launch pad into Mexico. So you can have private airplanes, King Airs. They make it into Acapulco. The Venezuelans can guarantee what's on the Venezuelan end. They can't guarantee what's on the Mexican end, but at least you've eliminated that risk entirely. You also have the maritime operations. And this is what Mr. Trump has now been confronting with, where he's blown a few of these boats out of the water. Well, that's an extensive operation. And so, again, they're going to charge the organization from Mexico, bring the product across the country, and then you pay one of the local groups in Venezuela who run the boat operations. So whether it's speedboats going out to meet with yachts, speedboats going out to meet with fishing boats, like a lot of the speedboat operations that take place from northeast part of Venezuela, that's outside of the island chain of the Antilles. Well, they can rendezvous with boats out there, then it's a straight shot to Europe. Now, those that operate within the chain, those tend to be the ones that are going to shoot up into the Caribbean and meet at a pre-designated point, or they'll rendezvous with a fishing boat coming out of Puerto Rico or a fishing boat coming out of the Dominican Republic. And so with respect to that first boat that Trump blew up, that was a significant boat. We're talking 40 to 50 feet, 11-man crew. Well, that boat is essentially stripped of everything. It's just a hull. And the reason why I'm very confident that it was a transshipment type operation is because you had the additional 9 men. That boat only requires a skipper, a pilot and a throttle man. We used to race offshore power boats. So it's just a pilot and a throttle man. Well, they need the extra 9 guys because they got 3 metric tons of product on the boat. Well, they got to transfer that product from the speedboat, the Go Fast, to, let's say, the Puerto Rican trawler, the Dominican trawler, or to a yacht out in the Caribbean. So that boat, the speedboat's going to pull up next to that boat, have the rendezvous with the coordinates already preset. So now you're going to have the 9 guys. Some of them are going to jump over and get on board the yacht. The rest are going to remain on the speedboat. Now, the speedboat guys are going to start, if you looked at the way the video, it shows that there were all the bags preloaded already onto the speedboat. Well, the bags have ropes tied between them. So it's essentially like if you go on an inner tube on a river, you see the people tie up all the inner tubes together. Well, that's essentially what the Venezuelans are doing. So that way they can take the bags, they'll take like 3 of the bags in a row that are tied up, throw those into the ocean. They float. So the crew on the yacht or the fishing trawler, they're going to have those long pike arm, those like stainless steel pike, essentially the tools that they use when they go lifting up the lobster traps. Well, they're going to have a long piece of metal with a hook on it. So you have 2 guys working the hooks, just pulling the ropes, like boop, boop, pulling it right out of the ocean. The other 3 or 4 guys on the yacht are running, storing the product, and then securing it so that the craft remains seaworthy. And so that's a 9-man operation to transfer 3 metric tons.
Let me ask you a question. How did you feel about that when you first saw it?
How did I personally feel about it? Look, these guys they've been designated. Like, I'm not advocating the trafficking perspective. Like, I know what they were doing. So when you hear the Venezuelan government saying, oh no, they're just fishermen, like, come on, that's not a fishing operation. Those boats are specifically designed to move product, and they are designed to rendezvous with whatever ships are going to bring it into. For instance, once it gets into the Puerto Rican boat, once the Puerto Rican boat returns to shore under the guise of, they smuggle the product ashore under the guise of returning home with the catch. Well, once you get it into Puerto Rico, it's in the U.S. There's no there's no customs at that point. Now, same thing with the Dominicans. See, you have to understand, on the East Coast, you have Puerto Rican trafficking groups, Dominican trafficking groups. Well, they don't want to buy product from the Mexicans because when they're in New York, they got to pay the New York price. Well, they don't want to pay $24,000 a key. So they can source it from a cousin in San Juan down in Puerto Rico, and they get maybe $19,500. But they can capture that differential. That delta impacts their profit margin. And so this is where you'll see the non-Mexican aligned groups operating essentially independently, primarily on the East Coast, which is where you get a lot of the Venezuelan operations, because these are Caribbean operations.
If you're looking for a recovery shake that actually does its job, check out Formula One from First Form. It's a rapid digesting whey protein isolate made for post-workout recovery. That means that it gets into your system fast to help the muscles repair and cut down soreness. It mixes ultra smooth, it's easy on your stomach, and it tastes legit. All the flavors are good, but for me, Cinnamon Toast Crunch is hands down the best one. Plus, it's NSF certified for sport and Informed Choice certified, so you know it's clean. First Form is giving free shipping on orders over $100, and if you don't love it, they'll give you your full refund. Hit the link in the description and grab Cinnamon Toast Crunch Formula One today. If you're into quality gear, you need Tac Pack, a monthly subscription box loaded with tactical gear from the top brands like Battle Arms Development, 9line, 511, and more. You can choose from Tac Pack Standard, $59.95 shipped with $90 to $120 worth of products, or Tac Pack Plus, $139.95 shipped with $240 to $300 worth of products. This September, Tac Pack Plus is stacked with over $330 worth of gear, including Battle Arms Development, 9line, and Next Level Armament. Use code Ironclad at TacPack.com for a free $70 tactical gift, pushing your value past $400. Tac Pack, gear you'll actually use. How deep is the relationship between the Cartel de Soles and the Venezuelan military command? Are they operating as like a criminal cartel, or is it as a shadow arm of the state? How's that work?
Sir, it's I got to become very well acquainted with the Venezuelan national who was responsible for laundering money for high-ranking Venezuelan government officials. And when I mean high-ranking, we're talking like attorney general level, minister of the interior level, and a number of high-ranking, Venezuelan generals, essentially. And the depiction of them as being involved in drug trafficking, although true, it's a little misleading in the sense that they're not actually distributing product. They're taking payment as product for facilitating other people's trafficking activities, and then they hand the product off to the Mexicans and say, hey, recoup for us. And so, although they're technically involved in drug trafficking, it's not necessarily that they're drug traffickers. They're profiting from the trafficking system. This is similar to how things operate in Mexico. The Mexican government isn't involved in drug trafficking, but they created a system called La Plaza, which allows for the political class to benefit from the narco trade to the United States without getting their hands dirty. Well, in Venezuela, they've just taken it, like I said, orders of magnitude greater. Whether it's the aviation operations, the nautical operations with the go-fast boats, you've got the new element, they're launching narco subs from the far east of Venezuela. These are, you have to understand, the European market is much wealthier than the United States market. So the 600 kilos that the Venezuelan will get in Caracas for his payment, well, it's going to generate a $9 million payout from selling it in Los Angeles. Well, that same 600 keys generates 38 million in Europe. And so Venezuela has turned to become the key flashpoint for launching loads to Europe, which has allowed for the aggregation of tremendous amounts of capital. So when the American government says, well, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is sitting on a total assets of $50 billion. Well, sure, a lot of that money came from the U.S., but where they really made their money was in Europe.
Have you seen concrete evidence of that? Of coordination between, the Cartel de Soles and the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranian intelligence services? What is that cooperation like? What does that look like?
And it's just more organized crime, sir. It's drug traffickers from other countries converging on Venezuela. So if you're German traffickers, French, Spanish, Belgian, Dutch, these are European countries. They can fly into, Honduras. There's an island right off the coast of Venezuela. And it's like the distance from Catalina to LA. And so you can fly there and then take a boat into Venezuela. That way you're not even documenting, your passports aren't even getting stamped. And so they're able to come into the country discreetly, negotiate the transactions. Down in Venezuela, a lot of times you'll see the Mexicans and the Colombians aligning because they're going to split the risk. So if there's a 3,000 kilo shipment to Spain, half will be product put up by the Mexicans, the other half will be put by the Colombians. But it's Spanish drug traffickers, or Greek, or Italian, or Baltic. It's not Spanish or other government agencies. Now, when you say Chinese, there's an extensive Chinese organized crime presence, but I don't mean to imply the Chinese government. There's triads operating. In Los Angeles, we have 4 different ethnic Chinese organized crime groups. Well, they're operating today. They've been operating for over 30 years. And so, they're not necessarily representing the government's issues, but no, don't get me wrong. The Chinese government does activate organized crime for specific purposes, but that's more in the economic espionage front. Like I knew guys that were involved with economic espionage involving Chinese organized crime, but not trafficking on behalf of the Chinese government. They were just stealing tech stuff.
You had some pretty serious relationships in the Mexican cartel space. Have you heard any kind of feedback about the Mexican cartel right now, about what's developing and what's happening in Venezuela? Essentially, are they threatened by the business that Venezuela is running currently right now? Is it affecting their business personally?
No, it's expanded it significantly because Venezuela provides a haven for them to operate. See, remember, the Venezuelans profit from the Mexican operations because they're taking the chunk off the top. And so they encourage not just, remember, and it's not a single cartel. There's 9 cartels in Mexico. Each one of them has an office in Venezuela. So Sinaloa's got their rep, Jalisco New Generation's got their rep, Independent, Juarez, Tijuana, Gulf. Venezuela has their arms wide open. It's a neutral territory, essentially. Come down here, do business. Just don't cause any headaches for the government.
I want to thank our partners over at Ammo Squared. They've built what they call America's Ammunition Reserve. Basically, this is an ammo savings account. You can sign up, pick from more than 70 different calibers. You can set an auto-buy budget and either choose a shipping schedule, or you can just let your personal reserve grow. Over time, your ammo stacks up and is stored for free in their climate-controlled facilities in Texas and Idaho until you are ready to ship. There are no minimums. There's no extra fees. It works whether you have a small budget or you just don't want to drop a few grand all at once. Thank you so much, Ammo Squared, for providing this cool service and for supporting the show.
They were ghosts. Who are these guys?
I've never heard this before.
Right behind me, we have armed police. They're ready for sort of riot patrol.
I'm Sean Ryan, and I'm hosting the new Ironclad original, Target Intelligence PSYOP.
We're not framing history correctly.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
It's an Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original.
An Ironclad original. The most popular product right now that's being sold for drugs, is it cocaine? Is it fentanyl? Is it meth? What is the one that right now that I would say that the Mexican cartels are manufacturing and selling outside, or is it being Just a lot of questions on all that. Can you clarify that for me?
Look, yeah, well, with respect to the most lucrative compounds, that's where you're talking to synthetic opioids, simply because the chemicals required to produce them are legal. They purchase what now the government characterizes as precursors. And then they use the precursors to produce the precursors. See, precursors on the black market are very expensive. You're buying gallons of methylamine, you're paying $2,500 to $4,000 a gallon. Well, we had the chemistry professor from USC develop the formulas on how to produce methylamine. We're making it for $40 a gallon. Well, it's a lot cheaper. And it's a lot less red flags because what you're purchasing isn't restricted. And so the profit margins are enormous in the synthetic space. Now, the Mexican government has essentially been assisting the cartels gain back a lot of market share in the United States. Because up until Mr. Trump's administration, you have to understand, last year before the Civil War happened with Sinaloa, there was a 44 organization network that the American government called the Sinaloa Cartel. There was a 27 organization network that was called Jalisco New Generation. So the two large groups, the transnational groups that have nationwide operations in the United States, combined have a total of 71 organizations. Last year in Mexico, there were over 450 organizations. So the two largest transnational networks only capture 15% of the organizations in Mexico. Today, the overwhelming majority of organizations in Mexico operate outside of the cartel structure because with synthetics, you don't need a collection of organizations. You only need collections of organizations when you're buying $50 million worth of product at a time, and you got to move it from Colombia all the way to Mexico into the United States. That takes an enormous network. And so most of the organizations today are operating outside of the cartel network because all they got to do is go online. I would suggest everyone read, there's a wonderful article, a series expose by Reuters, where the reporters were literally purchasing $3,500 worth of chemicals online. And that was enough to produce 2.5 kilos of fentanyl. Oh, excuse me, I don't want to say the word anymore. Of fenny. Well, it may not sound like a lot of product. By weight, it's not a lot, but 2.5 kilos of fenny produces over 600,000 doses of counterfeit oxys. The majority of the fenny being sold in the United States, you see when the seizures happen, they're always in pill form. Well, they're being marketed as counterfeit oxys or counterfeit perkies, but they're using the fenny to produce those counterfeit pills. There's an enormous market for people that are abusing synthetic opioids, and they're being tricked into thinking these are legitimate oxys when in reality they're fenny-based. Well, that $3,500 investment maybe take in total, maybe pay some guy $25,000 to synthesize the reactions. You're going to pay $20,000 to get it to the border, maybe another $10,000 to get them pressed into pills. The kids that are running across the border, they're charging $10,000, $15,000. And so you're $70,000 in on an operation to produce 600,000 doses that in Phoenix has a wholesale price of $2 a dose. So it's a $1.2 million payout for a $70,000 investment. What do you need a cartel for? And so what's happened in Mexico is you had an explosion of the mom and pops, smaller groups producing smaller quantities outside of the cartel structure that gobbled up a lot of the market share in the United States because in the aggregate, it adds up to a lot of product. Well, the Mexican government's efforts have really crippled the ability of the mom and pops to bring their product to market. That's where you see the 20,000 Mexican soldiers on patrol. Well, yeah, they look sharp in their uniforms and they got the canine units. Well, what are they disrupting? Like sometimes I watch this and I'm just thinking to myself, do they think we're that stupid? How do having soldiers marching across the border do anything with the tunnel 60 feet below? They're literally going right underneath the soldiers. So the people whose operations are being disrupted are the people whose organizations can't afford to build $30, $40, $50 million importation operations. In Tijuana, Sinaloa ran 3 different cells. You had the overland importation route with the tractor trailers, overland importation operation with the private civilian vehicles with hidden compartments, and then the subterranean operation with the tunnels. None of those are impacted by anything the Mexican government has done to date. It's all smoke and mirrors. And the Trump administration knows this because they keep ratcheting up the pressure. Now, the Mexican government has done a good job in disrupting the operations, the importation operations for the mom and pops. because now they're having a difficult time to bring the product across the border. But that simply means that the market share that the cartels lost over the past 5 years, they're gaining all that back because the mom and pops are now forced to sell it to the cartel reps in Mexico. So the Sinaloa rep in, Culiacan or Monchi, he'll buy it from them, but he's not paying the $2 per dose price. That's the Phoenix price. They're now getting it for 20 cents a dose. So not only are the cartel guys gaining the market share back in the United States, but they're now sourcing the product in Mexico at a deep discount. So when they bring it to the United States, what are they experiencing? Windfall profits. They've never had it better as far as profits go. And this is the circumstances that the Mexican government keeps playing these little half-ass games where they want to create the appearance that they're trying to disrupt the operations. But in reality, it doesn't really impact. Like, I can give you 3 ideas off the top of my head that can cripple the importation operations in Tijuana. But you just have to understand the choke points. But putting 20,000 troops to walk back and forth across the border, and they're literally walking on top of the tunnels, come on, that's just all show. That's dog and pony. And so to answer your question, I believe that the most consumed product in the United States are probably the synthetic opioids, simply given the huge number of people who believe they're taking counterfeit oxy. Like, they're not going to the local dealer saying, let me get some Phenny. They're purchasing, the 30 milligram Perkies or the 60 milligrams. They're essentially made to look just like some legitimate pharmaceuticals. And so the customers are essentially getting deceived. As far as after that, it's primarily, I believe, crystal methamphetamine, just by volume. And of course,
is that the same for across the world in Europe as well?
In Europe, they didn't have the synthetic explosion. Like, I've had a number of friends that were, fought in Afghanistan, Iraq. They came back, suffered combat-related injuries, and many of them unwittingly became addicts because the military medical establishment was just handing out oxys like, back in 04, 05, 06. That was the pain management protocol. Guys that had never gotten high, guys that were getting ready to go to Q, and they just turned into, it's a
I
very
can
unfortunate,
confirm all of that. Yes.
a very unfortunate circumstance. And so the American medical establishment unwittingly created the largest market on the planet for synthetics. And so on the European side, from what I understand, it's primarily cocaine and crystal.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. How does Gonzalez Valencia, Venezuela, how does Abigail Gonzalez Valencia's extradition important? How is that important development for all of this conversation?
Well, look, I'm not some knee-jerk Trump supporter, quite frankly. I'm from California. I'm not even really a Republican, but there are times when you got to give credit to where credit is due. And the unconventional use of threatened tariffs and military strikes have created leverage to where the Mexican government is handing over individuals whom they would never in a million years have previously handed over. And Abigail Valencia is a key illustration of this point, because you're literally talking about the wealthiest trafficker on the planet. This guy dwarfed Chapo Guzman. This guy's much wealthier than Miles Zambada. In fact, 30 years ago, same thing, Phil, for 20 years, we got fed this steady stream from Mexico, Chapo. Well, who was Chapo's supplier? Armando Valencia. The Valencias for 30 years have been the power behind the throne. And so when Armando Valencia, who was partnered in the Sinaloa era with Nacho Coronel and Jalisco, that was the two big groups, they controlled Jalisco. So when Armando Valencia gets knocked off, then Lobo Valencia gets knocked off, Tigre gets knocked off, then Nacho Coronel meets his maker. Well, what happened? You had a changing of the guard. Well, who stepped forward? Sons, nephews, their cousins. That collection of new individuals, the younger group, they call themselves the new generation. The new generation of Valencias, the new generation of Coronels have stepped up to take over the mantle of their previous generation. Abigail Valencia was one of the founders of Jalisco New Generation, and his organization, he was the head of a group called Los Queenies. They financed Jalisco New Generation's expansion. Mencho worked for Abel Valencia. It was Abel Valencia who put Mencho in charge of Jalisco New Generation. Well, now Abel Valencia is a trafficker that 99% of Americans have never even heard of, and quite frankly, 98% of traffickers have never heard of. But he is absolutely instrumental in two key respects. One, of course, with respect to the founding of Jalisco New Generation, and two, more importantly, because Los Queenies had the most sophisticated money laundering operation in Mexico. And this is where I believe the Trump administration is actually going, because I actually think that his nickname was Queenie, that Abel Valencia may end up cooperating. And if the Trump administration can induce him to cooperate, the guy's already looking at a life sentence because he was just extradited last month. So he's looking at life. 3 months ago, his brother Gerardo just got life. 2 months ago, his brother Jose just got a 30-piece. So now the American government can step to Abel and say, hey, listen, we'll make a deal. We'll do the Ovidio Guzman package for you. You do 15, your brothers get 15. We'll let your families come to the United States. We want you to lay out the money laundering networks, because the United States government has spent 35 years targeting narcos. Well, that's not a very successful policy, because the narcos, quite frankly, are the disposable element in the drug trade. The people that control the trade in Mexico is the political class, and in particular, the political parties. And so when you spend 35 years targeting narcos, well, cartels rise, cartels fall, kingpins rise, kingpins fall, nothing changes. Because the substrate upon which everything was built is La Plaza, the system that was created by the Mexican government under the Party PRI. Well, this system's been in place now for 50 years. Well, Abel Valencia with Los Queenies oversaw the money laundering apparatus for Sinaloa prior to 2010. After the fracture between Sinaloa and Jalisco broke away, they formed a new generation. Well, Los Queenies is now focused primarily on Jalisco's money laundering. And so when Abel Valencia was apprehended, the American government claimed that, hey, he's sitting on top of a network of 1,800 companies. Well, Abel Valencia, the guy with, modest education. I'm not suggesting the guy's not intelligent. I'm not saying he's not street smarts, but what he's not doing is going on LegalZoom.com, filing incorporation papers in 4 different countries for companies that have tens of millions of dollars going through. You have regulatory issues, tax compliance issues, legal issues. Well, it requires a network of attorneys, a network of financial professionals. That's the key to the drug trade. Because if you want to disrupt the drug trade in Mexico, you can do one of 3 things. Either 1, topple the Mexican regime. No one's talking about doing that. 2, you can put enough pressure on the Mexican government to where they perceive that it's in their interest to forego all this drug money in order to either preserve what they got or preserve their territory. Or 3, forget about the first 2, just undermine the money laundering networks that allow for the money to go from the narco class to the politicians. And so there was a famous circumstance involving a president in Mexico called Salinas. Caused a huge scandal, maybe a little bit before your time, but right in the middle of what was going on with my case. Salinas was the president of Mexico, and it caused a big brouhaha because it turned out that his brother had Swiss bank accounts with $800 million in it. So how did the president of Mexico's brother get $800 million fortune? Well, that was the money. That was the president of Mexico's cut from the drug trade. And so when the Secretary of Defense, the defense minister in Mexico, is discovered to be living in a $10 million high-rise, this is $10 million in 1997 dollars. That's $25 million high-rise today. So I'm sure generals make a pretty good living, but they don't make the kind of money to live in $25 million luxury high-rises. And so this is the circumstance in Mexico. And so if you want to disrupt that, without attacking the Mexican government, you have to disable the money laundering networks based out of Guadalajara that are always protected. So you're going to have the Jalisco New Generation's money laundering network that coordinates with the political class's money laundering network. Well, for the first time, The American government has in their possession someone whose operation dealt with the political class. Chapo Guzman didn't deal with the political class. He would never got extradited. When the guys who deal with the politicians get arrested, they don't survive the encounter. When the Mexican, when Obama insisted, go get me Arturo Beltran, the Mexican president said, aye, aye, sir. Tells the military, go get Arturo Beltran. You think the defense minister is going to arrest Beltran? Arturo's the one paying him $60 million a year. They're not going to hand him over to the Americans. What if Arturo spills the beans? So then, of course, when the military went to go arrest Arturo Beltran, well, he resisted arrest. If you want to believe the Mexican narrative, he fought for 2 days, and the brave Mexican soldiers withstood the onslaught. And when they reported back to Mr. Obama, they said, sorry, sir, we apologize, but Arturo resisted arrest, and he was unalive during the attempted arrest.
So let me ask you, how significant is this Gonzalez Venezuela? How significant would this be if he does give them information? Would it dismantle a lot of the cartels because of the money laundering?
No, it dismantles the ability of the money to get from the narco organizations to the political class.
Got it.
That's the key. You have to break that connection, because the political class, and in particular the political parties in Mexico, they're all pigs eating at the same trough. Even a politician that is relatively honest, there's no evidence indicating that Ms. Scheinbaum is involved in any criminal activity, but she's a political participant in the Morena party. Well, the American government said the Morena party under AMLO, her mentor, was rife with drug cash. Well, you don't think she knows which cartel butters her party's bread? And so that's the kind of dynamic you get in Mexico. And like I said, in the 1990s, the Tijuana cartel was the most powerful cartel in Mexico, working with the Gulf. Well, they were under the protection of the PRI. In the early 2000s, there was an election where a new party won the presidency. Well, when PAN won the presidency with Vicente Fox, the tables turned. That was the cartel that backed that particular party was Sinaloa. So once the rival political party wins and the tables turn, well, at that point, it's no fun when the rabbits got the gun. Now Tijuana gets smashed. Now the Gulf gets smashed. It's not the Mexican government smashing narcos. It's the Mexican government taking out the organizations that politically support the rival political party. And so the party that benefited, the cartel that benefited their ascendancy was Sinaloa. And I'm not sharing with you anything your audience doesn't already know, because in the last 6 months, you've interviewed people from the CIA. You actually spoke with one of it was a female, very intelligent, attractive blonde. And you asked her, hey, look, I just spoke to a former drug trafficker from LA. He said the CIA collaborates with some of the cartels. And her response was like, well, yeah. Yeah. She tried making it a little more palatable. We don't condone the drug trafficking. Like, okay, she has to make it a little more palatable. But she explained essentially that, look, whenever it's in the U.S. government strategic interest to do so, they'll partner up with a particular drug cartel. And according to the CIA woman, she said, look, the American government will support a particular cartel so long as that cartel is supporting the political party or the politician in Mexico that we want to win. Now, that's the real world. So if you want this particular politician to win, it's, well, who are the rival cartels supporting the rival parties? Target them.
I want to ask about money laundering real quick before I jump to something else that's on my mind. But so the money laundering that's happening in Mexico, how does that work in America? Like, are they able to use American banks? And once that's identified, I know there's several cases with, I forget the name of the bank, Robo Bank or something like that, that's been caught helping, I guess, channel money. And so how does that work? What's some of the processes that they use to be able to launder their money and also make it effective in America?
Well, that's two very different subjects. With respect to the United States, there hasn't been very much interest lately in moving money into the U.S. Quite frankly, from a cartel money laundering perspective, the United States is not a safe place to park money. And quite frankly, our fiscal and monetary circumstances are not conducive to parking the money here, simply because the dollar, we have a lot of inflation issues, debasement issues. The American government has essentially abandoned the strong dollar policy. I actually have, this is my background, even more so than drug trafficking, it's on the money laundering side. And so you see the American government essentially abandoning the strong dollar policy so that they can reshore manufacturing to the U.S. Consequently, you got to strategically weaken the value of the dollar to make our manufacturing more competitive, exports more competitive. Well, the last thing you want to do is park your money in American dollars because you're getting debased. And so, Americans see their return. If you had $200,000 in your 401k in January of 2020, well, by December of 24, you had a 80% return. But if you remove the dollar as the denominator and plug in gold, what is your rate of return? 15%. If you remove gold as the denominator and plug in Bitcoin, what's your return? Negative 90%. And so I'm confident that, particularly in the last 6 months, you've seen within the money laundering space a concerted effort to move into Bitcoin and gold and primarily crypto. However, prior to the great financial crisis of 2010, yes, there was a significant amount of money being moved into the United States. There was billions of narco dollars invested in the S&P 500. However, the American government, just last week, the Trump administration sent a high-ranking Treasury official, a guy named John Hurley, to Mexico specifically for the purposes of addressing with his Mexican counterparts and individuals within the banking sector in Mexico the Trump administration's efforts to cripple the ability to move illicit financing through the Mexican financial system. Like, that's where the problem is. Now, does some of it come to the U.S.? The Venezuelans launder their money in the U.S., but they're buying real estate. They're not parking money in the market at this point. Now, from the Mexican perspective, it makes much more sense just to move into crypto. Or
let me ask. Sorry, I just want to tie a couple connect a couple dots for me. Just very curious. So we had a guest on here who talked about some of the corruption in a ranch with fake counts of cattle. We call the ghost cattle. Essentially, a rancher eventually killed himself when he was figured out, and they believe it's connections based on paperwork to the CJ&G cartel. But it was a ranch that said he had over 100,000 cattle. He was getting funded by the bank. It was Robobank who was funding it. Another one that was has been in the past connected to other cartels, laundering money. Is this something you've heard as a possibility? Are we pretty close to the truth on that?
Standard operating procedure in Mexico is a concept called fictitious billing. And that's how you get the cash surface into the Mexican financial system. You had an earlier guest, Jay Flores. Jay is the biggest drug trafficker in the history of the United States. And he indicated that when him and his brothers sent over $2.5 billion worth of cash from the United States to Mexico, not one truck was seized. They suffered zero losses on the cash aspect of the operation. Well, they got to get that $2 billion, not Jay, because he's the customer. Once he transfers the money to the cartel, well, they got to get that money into the Mexican financial system. And see, what always made Sinaloa strong, because they started out with natural disadvantages. Sinaloa is not a border state. And so when they would source the product at the Guatemala border, they got to go 2,500 miles to their distribution operation in Los Angeles. From Sinaloa, it's 900 miles. From Jalisco, it's 1,000. From Michoacan, it's 1,200. All the other cartels were literally on the border. And so they were able to gain advantages on the front end. Sinaloa always had to innovate. They created the regional distribution hub model right after NAFTA took place in 94. They introduced the concept of insurance, where they insure the loads to the regional distribution office. These are revolutionary ideas in the mid-1990s that changed drug trafficking forever. But what advantages that Sinaloa did have was that their territory included the two largest ports in Mexico. Well, that's a strategic asset. You can't just recreate ports. So with ports, you're able to bring product into the country. You're able to bring precursor chemicals into the company. The other thing that Sinaloa controlled in the territory that they exercised influence in was the tourist havens. Vallarta, Mazatlan, Cabo, and they always concentrated on Cancun. the tourist industry in Mexico is key to false billing. Because if you have a large concentration of American tourists, what do they bring with them? Dollars. We don't use yen. We don't use Chinese yuan, euros. So now you have a basis for Mexican businesses to introduce dollars into the Mexican financial system. And if they ask, well, where's all these dollars coming from? Oh, gringo tourists. And so if you want an illustration, put it this way. We'll do a quick $10 million run. 10 million get collected in LA. They shoot it down to Guadalajara. Now, the guys in Guadalajara said, you know what? Send it to the taxi cab company in Cabo. They're using taxis. Not very sophisticated. You're wrong. Cabo San Lucas is actually a combination of two cities. One is Cabo, one is Los Cabos, about 20 miles apart. So you can do about 4 runs with the taxi in an hour. So what you do is you start 2 taxi cab companies, one in Cabo, one in Los Cabos, with 50 cabs each for 100 cabs. On paper, those 100 cabs are out on the road every day. Day watch, evening watch, overnight. You don't even have to put the taxis on the road. The party buses that go from Cabo to La Paz, they don't leave the warehouse. The sport fishing boats that are in the marina in Cabo, they never leave the dock. On paper, 2 charters a day. The Sea-Doos never leave the dock. On paper, all day, gringos running Sea-Doos. Well, with respect to the taxis, it's 4 runs every hour. $50 a run. So now you're generating $200 per hour. That's $1,600 for 8-hour shift per cab, times 100 cabs. That's $160,000 in cash every shift. That's $480,000 in cash every day getting introduced into the Mexican financial system just for 2 taxi cab companies. At the end of a year, you're over $50 million in cash. Just 2 taxi cab companies. Now, imagine all the taxi cab companies in Vallarta, Mazatlan, Cancun, Cabo. Now, all the other opportunities. What do tourists like to do? Parasailing, hang gliding, helicopter tours. There are surfing classes where there's 3 classes a day, 4 classes a day, 30 gringos a day. There ain't an American in the fucking water. On paper, they're there, They're renting surfboards, they're buying t-shirts, they're buying suntan lotion, they're at the little convenience stand, ordering food, ordering soda. None of it ever happens. You'd be surprised how many American women go down there. They want to get their hair done, get their nails done. Tanning salons, beauty salons, and this is before you get to the big operations. Nightclubs. You get a nightclub in Cabo, 600 Americans come down there. Let's say you spend $200 a piece. It's $120,000. Well, the next day when they go to the bank, they deposit $380. These were hard drinking gringos. Well, that extra 160 grand came out of a duffel bag. So every business could potentially, and quite frankly, oftentimes are co-opted. And so you've got these networks that are ran from Guadalajara where they develop these opportunities in all the, so they'll say, okay, send us 50 million to Cabo, send us 30 million to Mazatlan. And they're entrusted with surfacing the capital through the concept of fictitious billing. So if you've got the individual with the ranch with fictitious heads of cattle, standard operating procedure.
Yeah, interesting. Awesome. Well, thank you for confirming that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, did you happen to see the podcast we did about the Fort Bragg cartel book with Seth?
No, sir, I haven't. I saw it.
Okay, so it was one of our more recent ones. It was a book published. A former veteran himself wrote a book about the Fort Bragg cartel, essentially a story that started with the death of 2 soldiers. One of them was a Delta operator. The other one was a support element. And eventually, as he ended up untying the story or further investigating it, you see a lot of crazy things with the connection of this one gentleman kind of stepping out of the military kind of structure and starting with one time meeting the wrong guy, and then now eventually he's getting really in depth with smuggling drugs, and it turned into the whole chaos of what that can turn into. He ended up getting his hands also on his kind of journal / book he was writing, and in that he talked about doing operations where he jumped in with drugs. He talked about different, I guess, murders he's done and whatnot, and so like the list goes on and on. And my question is, one of the questions that went viral with you was talking about how there's military members training some of the CJ&G and whatnot. But is this something that is common where active military members are getting sucked into smuggling drugs and kind of, like this is a Delta operator. This is some of the best of the best. I'm not saying it's a 100% true. I'm just saying this is the book that I just recently read, but as well as from the podcast. Is this something that happens a lot? Is military members getting sucked into drug smuggling?
Well, there's two issues. First of all, with respect to Carolina, Sinaloa maintains a logistical hub right outside of Fort Bragg, and that's simply to receive shipments. Now, the distribution component of that hub works out of Raleigh, and they're responsible for the Mid-Atlantic states. And so, whatever involvement he may have hit, I can't speak to his particular circumstance. I do know that there is a logistical hub right outside of Bragg, like 20 minutes outside.
Yeah, it's an airport. It's an airport that's right outside of it that they're able to ship into and out.
Well, it's the receiving locations move because they have to have accommodations big enough to accommodate tractor trailers. Because when tractor trailers come from LA, you've got, anywhere from 600 to 2,000 kilos. Well, you're not putting that in a Toyota Camry. And so I'm sure that put it like the mechanic shops that were big enough to accommodate tractor trailers 30 years ago are not the ones being used today. But just that area of Carolina serves as a logistical hub because you're close to 95. Bragg itself is essentially a small city, so you get a ton of trucking coming in and out. And so it provides a natural cover, and that's the emergent break glass in case of emergency cell. So if the New York cell gets taken down, boom, they can rotate Chicago or Atlanta because they only have 3 distribution operations east of the Mississippi. And so the Carolina is like the emergency hub. Now, with respect to smuggling, while I was in prison, I was at the Veterans Reentry Program, and I probably met dozens of men that were involved with smuggling. And
veterans?
Yes, sir. Active duty. And what they do is they were recruiting guys, and it started right around the mid-2000s because you started getting a lot of guys coming back from the military, serving overseas with combat-related injuries. And so then it would take about a year to matriculate through the entire medical discharge process. And so we'll use one guy as an example. I'll just use the nickname. His name was Lucky. Well, Lucky was from Georgia, stationed in California. And so as he was going through the release process, he'd get leave to drive home to visit his wife and his newborn baby daughter. Well, he would pick up a car in LA that's already preloaded, and he drives he gets paid $20,000 to drive from Los Angeles to Georgia. Now, of course, he's in his full uniform. So when he gets pulled over, he said they never searched the car because no police officer is going to pull a combat vet who just came back, suffered injuries out of the car. Hey, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. Thank you for your service. How was it in Iraq? And so and these are essentially young guys, 21, 22, 23-year-olds, bunch of knuckleheads. To them, 20 grand is a lot of money. And so they'd get $20,000 to drive from LA to, in this case, Savannah, Georgia. Or he'd drive to Atlanta, drop off the car, then he'd go to Savannah to visit his family. A week later, he drives back up to Atlanta, picks up the car's already loaded with money. He never sees what's in the car. It's just money going from Atlanta back to LA, product going from LA to Atlanta. Now, they incentivize him to bring on board all his buddies because pretty soon his friends start noticing, hey, where do you got all this money? Like he'd show up with 20 grand, give it to his wife, but the 10 grand he got for driving the car back, him and his friends would go blow that in Tijuana. And so pretty soon, he said half the damn unit was driving cars. Oh, you're going to Seattle? Here, take this car. You're going to Salt Lake? Take this car. You got a whole network of guys that are, just young knuckleheads, no sense, driving all over the United States, delivering cars. And that operation was ultimately taken down because the shop in LA that was modifying the vehicles for the hidden compartments, turns out one of the mechanics there, the engineers, was involved in trafficking himself. He got busted. He tipped off the DA what was going on. And they actually planted a recording device in one of the cars Lucky was driving. And so as Lucky, he had a new recruit because they take the new recruit with them on one of his runs to show him the ropes essentially. And so they recorded the entire conversation of Lucky driving across the country, telling the route, this is what you do, blah, 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 this is what you say, you get pulled over, make sure you got your uniform on, make sure you got your ID, everything, blah, blah, just give them the whole rundown. And it essentially laid out the entire operation for the DEA. So when the DEA came in, they partnered with, military law enforcement authorities, and they just took down an entire network of young soldiers that were induced into driving around the country.
Crazy.
Yes,
It's
sir.
crazy to think, that they would risk their career on that.
These guys were already young guys, already on the process of getting discharged. And so if they make, 6 trips in 6 months, that's $120,000.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in you reading that book and hearing what your thoughts are after you've done reading it. The special operations community heavily does not like that book and doesn't and believes a lot of it is far-fetched and untrue. I'm trying to get my hands on the journal that he has so then I can kind of read and confirm as well. But very interesting book, and I think it's something you'd enjoy. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that at another time.
With respect to the special forces, if I can just quickly add, they fall under the category of special skills. The drivers, the young guys that were coming from LA all over the country, those guys are completely disposable from the narco perspective. The special skill guys are heavily recruited. Now, there's not going to be a lot of them. Abahel Valencia's organization, along with Nacho Coronels, were the ones who recruited the 4 special forces that ultimately went on to create what became known as the Matazetas.
So you still believe that's true?
Oh, yeah, of course that's true.
I can't find evidence of that. I can't find names. I can't find contacts. Every special operations guy I know cannot find any kind of valid.
Look, I spoke with the Navy SEAL who said that the CIA knows their names. He just doesn't want to, because he contacted me to say, hey, look, this is what's going on. It's like, I don't know their names. I just know their positions. Now, the one that operates independently, the 5th one, he handles the domestic affairs in the United States. That's a separate group. But the 4 that created the paramilitary wing, yes, sir, that's 100% rock solid within the trafficking community.
Well, I hope that one of them would reach out to me, and I would love to hear more about that situation. Or if you talk to them, let them know we'd love to have someone on here. We could,
I'm on supervised release. My probation officer would go nuts if I reach out to anyone like that. But look,
understood.
I think it would be wise, I think, for like the administration, not that it's my place to make suggestions, but you have to incentivize these guys to defect. Because right now they're in a bad spot. But you look at the deal that Ovidio Guzman got. That was a sweet deal. Because you want to cripple either their paramilitary operations, but keep in mind, at this point, that organization was formed in 2009. That thing is 16 years old. And so, that ball was started, and that's essentially rolling. But if you could incentivize them to either defect, incentivize other high-ranking individuals within the paramilitary structure. But again, see, that's the mistake that we as Americans make, thinking we got to target the narcos. The American government has had this experience. When you were in Afghanistan, the American military unalived countless Taliban fighters. Every one of them were disposable. The guys we wanted, Bin Laden, Pakistan; Zawahiri, Pakistan; Mullah Omar, Pakistan; Haqqani, Pakistan; Kedashura, Pakistan. What the hell are we doing in Afghanistan? He's been 20 years fighting 17-year-olds? Every one of them were disposable. Well, you can't spend $2 trillion fighting the disposable elements of your adversary. Well, in Mexico, the narcos are disposable. Cartels rise, cartels fall. 35 years ago, the American government celebrated the takedown of, Feliz Gallardo. It was a crushing blow. Did anything change? 5 years later, Guado Palma, head of the Sinaloa cartel, his Learjet crashed. The American government said Sinaloa was on its last legs. This is 30 years ago. Guado Palma's plane crashed 2 months before Windows 95 came out. Sinaloa is still going strong. Amado Carrillo, Benjamin Ariano, his brother, Armando Valencia, Ocio Cart, every one of these guys get knocked off. We can do literally a roll call for 30 years worth of narcos, and every year the situation gets worse. The narcos are no different than Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. Now, because the American government is not going to do anything against the Mexican government of any significant threat with respect to toppling, well, then you have to undermine the money laundering networks, because that is what breaks the connection between the drug trafficking world and the political class. And that's where I see the Trump administration moving, because, like I said, they just sent an undersecretary last week, a gentleman named John Hurley, specifically for the purposes of attacking the financial networks. And the Trump administration were astute enough to say, give us Abahel Valencia. And we know you have him in custody, so you can't say he was unalive resisting arrest. Now, normally the government would never hand these guys over. The last 25 group in August, the 26 group in June. But the unconventional use of these asymmetric threats are forcing the Mexican government to do things they would otherwise normally never do. Abahel Valencia, I believe, is the first narco, even more important than Chapo Guzman. Abahel Valencia is the first narco who can give us some insight into those money laundering networks.
Do you believe that since the, I guess, capture of El Mayo and his cooperation with the U.S. gave us kind of a kill list or a list that is fueling these recent arrests, the sanctions, these cross-border ops, like, believe that was that he's giving information right now?
Look, the American intelligence gathering capacity in Mexico is extensive. So I have no doubt that the DEA and the intelligence communities have mapped out the organizational structures of the Sinaloa networks. Like, I don't think El Mayo would be in a position, he could just basically confirm information already known.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Now with respect to someone like Abel Valencia, he's in a different circumstance, because he may be able to tell you, well, where are the ranches in Jalisco, or where are the tequila factories in Jalisco where the labs are built underneath. Because when you've got the predators flowing around, what are they using? They're using the heat seeking to try to identify for the heat signatures. So they build the labs under the tequila factories, because now they're going to get the heat signature from the tequila production. Well, he may know the locations of those type of operations. Again, giving up narcos doesn't affect anything in the grand scheme of things. If he can identify the law firms. So for instance, when Abel Valencia's brother was arrested, he was arrested in Uruguay. They used basically three countries. They used Mexico, Panama, and Uruguay. Now, Panama and Uruguay are financial havens. And so the money will go from Guadalajara, from the gas, or from the taxi cabs. Now it's in the Mexican financial system. So the offshore company in Panama that loaned the taxi cab the money to buy the taxis, they pay off that loan. So then the offshore company in Panama loans the money to an offshore company in Uruguay. The offshore company in Uruguay loans the money to an offshore company in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic private equity group will loan the money to a company in Mexico whose president or owner just happens to be the senator's brother, the general's son-in-law, the congresswoman's husband. Now you have cycled the money from Los Angeles through the taxi cab company, from Guadalajara, all the way around, and now it's landed in the congresswoman's husband's name. Well, those operations are orchestrated in most part by very highly educated Mexican financial professionals, supported by law firms, supported by the entire financial services network. Now, it is supplemented, quite frankly, by a lot of American financiers. You see quite a few of these guys. You get a lot of American financiers, and you get a lot of medical doctors getting involved in money laundering in Mexico, because these recruitments all take place in prison. Because these medical professionals and the financial guys, they suffer what are called collateral consequences. A drug trafficker, you go to prison, you pay your fine, you're done with your sentence. Well, the professionals suffer additional consequences in that the SEC won't reinstate their Series 7 license or their Series 63 license. And so my buddy that was on Wall Street, worked at Merrill Lynch, I'm not going to say his name, but he worked at Merrill Lynch, providing private wealth management consultations for high net worth individuals. Well, when he got released from prison, these guys get charged. They're going to get 20, 30 years. In the end, the government gives them 48 months. Little slap on the wrist bullshit sentences. But when they get out of prison, now they're in a jackpot. He's working at the Amazon warehouse. He reaches out to Merrill. They want nothing to do with him. None of the other Wall Street banks want anything to do with him. SEC won't reinstate his licenses. His network of buddies on Wall Street, none of them can do anything for him. Well, professionally, he's at a dead end. At home, he's got problems. His wife didn't marry an Amazon warehouse. She expects that 7-figure Wall Street lifestyle. His oldest daughter was getting ready to go to college. She needs, money to pay to go to university. His youngest daughter wanted a new car. She was about to turn 16. Well, at the moment where he was at the lowest point in his life, professionally, and within his marriage, who was there to bail him out?
The cartel.
Can't find a job, huh, Gringo? That's too bad. Merrill Lynch, very impressive. NYU Business School, very impressive. Marine, 8 years. Force Recon, very impressive. You won't get the SEC won't reinstate your licenses? Don't worry, Gringo. SEC's got no jurisdiction in Jalisco. And they make their pitch. And they start literally at the high water mark. So your highest year salary, whether it's being a trader, developer, any of the financial services related sectors of the economy, your highest year, your best year on Wall Street, that's your base pay. And once you start providing services, because they'll tell you, look, there's a lot of individuals, high net worth individuals in Mexico that would love to have the services of a Wall Street banker. Guys in Sinaloa, Jalisco, Michoacan. And it's very well known throughout the financial community of prisoners. Like, it's always like an inside joke. Man, we should just go to Mexico. You gonna go to Mexico? Like, you always hear them joking around. What do you think about Mexico? Because it's just active recruitment's going on. I can't tell you how many doctors came up to me. Hey, Pete, that guy that you're on the soccer team with, are those guys for real? Because they're going to open up clinics for him all over the place. And, I'm like, look, doc, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but understand these are serious people. And if you get caught up with a second case, you're not a first-time offender. You're not going to get that break. You're going to get smashed. And the guidelines are much more significant for money laundering.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you see a lot of the American financial, a number of them. I've met guys that, they develop hotels and resorts. I met guys that were traders. You see like American traders that can't get their licenses. They open up an offshore trading fund in the Dominican Republic or in Panama. See, they use Panama and the Dominican Republic because those are territorial tax jurisdictions. So when the money goes from Guadalajara to Panama, the money generated by the offshore company in Panama by loaning it to a group in Uruguay, the Panamanian government gets no taxes. Then the Uruguayan group will loan it to a private equity group in the DR. So while the Uruguay does have taxes, so they don't get labeled a tax haven, in reality, they're effectively a tax haven because they have what's called a 10-year tax holiday. So you open up a company in Uruguay, run it for 9 years, you don't pay any taxes. It's only after year 10 that you begin paying taxes. So you send the money from Guadalajara to Panama. Panama loans it to Uruguay. Uruguay people pay no tax. The Panamanian company pays no taxes to Panama. The Uruguayan company pays no taxes to Uruguay. Uruguay loans it to the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is a territorial tax jurisdiction. So the private equity group in the DR, they loan it to the business in Mexico that's owned by the senator's brother. So not only have they surfaced the money through the Mexican financial system and through 3 different offshore essentially venues, they are able to pull all of this off tax-free. Well, that level of sophistication is not Pancho, the neighborhood drug dealer with a 3rd grade education, handing over duffel bags of cash in the parking lot of the local strip club. And so with respect to like the American operations, you do have some Americans getting involved, but, don't underestimate the intelligence and sophistication of the Mexican money laundering networks in Guadalajara. Pretty much all of them go to college. I can't tell you how many of them went to USC. And so
That's funny.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time, man. We're going to have to circle back and do it again soon.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you so much for all the information you give us every single time, and your energy is always outstanding, man. I just appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me back. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to Borderland, Narcosis, an Ironclad original, presented by none other than First Form Supplements. You guys, don't forget to check it out, firstform.com/Borderland. Until next time, we'll see you later. And sorry about the broken screen. That was my fault.